The Amazon rainforest is one of the greatest natural resources on the globe, both in terms of the resources it contains and in terms of its role in the production of oxygen and air purification in the world. The forest stores up to 120 billion metric tons of carbon, which is equivalent to almost 12 years of global emissions at current rates. If it is cleaned, most of it will go into the atmosphere, and it looks like this process has already begun. Over the past few decades, massive deforestation has been taking place in the world's largest rainforest. Scientists believe that since 17% of the forest has already been lost, the tipping point will be reached with deforestation by 20 to 25%. What caused the largest deforestation on the planet? And who is responsible for this? Let's figure it out. The Amazon forests recently celebrated a 10 million year anniversary. During this time, the colossal river basin has become home to many species of animals and plants. There are about 400 billion trees alone, and scientists meet previously unseen representatives of fauna every 4 days. 5.5 million square kilometers of forest are located on the territory of 9 states at once: Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Guyana, Suriname, French Guiana. And, logically, the logging industry exists everywhere, but the loss of forests in the Brazilian part of the Amazon, which accounts for about 60% of the total forest cover, is simply amazing. Local residents, despite global warming, systematically support the processes of the death of Givi and large-scale logging, the control of which exists purely nominally. Every minute, Gavia loses more than 150 acres. Experts warn that the violation of the water cycle will certainly lead to a decrease in precipitation and provoke a drought, which it would seem impossible to imagine at all in these latitudes. Why, then, is humanity shooting itself in the foot, destroying the forest? It all started in 1964. During this period, the golden age of the state began. The military junta seized power, which will do a lot of wonderful things. Thanks to them, poor peasants had power lines, a network of roads, and military bases. The population quickly grew from 115,000 to 1 million. There were plenty of jobs, because new mines and farms were growing by leaps and bounds. Such growth was a miracle. Propagandists trumpeted from all screens promising eternal well-being to everyone who went to explore the virgin forest and extract a bright future for their country. Already 12 years after the military came to power, the Trans-Amazon Highway connecting Brazil, Colombia, Peru and Ecuador was opened. Of course, the peasants, having decided that a lucky ticket had fallen into their hands, rushed towards their own happiness and trouble for posterity. It's just that the population on the territory of the country has caused the need to make quick and rash decisions, because the more people live on Earth, the more they need means of livelihood. The more they need industrial facilities, and most importantly fields for growing crops and raising livestock, and the Green Sea certainly hinders this. Since the junta, along with it, all the local peasants had a very vague idea of how to properly distribute land, master economic flows and take control of them, they simply used, and still use, the slash and burn method. In simple words, the forest turns into a field through a controlled fire on several hectares of territories. The method is simple and affordable, but disastrous for the local flora and fauna. Not only is it the destruction of all life in a certain territory, but there is also no reason for the peasants not to let the fire burn another hectare. There will be more fields. For 5 decades, during which people were brainwashed through the media, sawmills, mines, soybean farms and pastures were on the outskirts of the disappearing forest. Thus, the first cause of the death of the tropical forest was massive colonization provoked by the thirst for rapid economic and social growth. With absolutely illiterate management of this process, the second sentence of the Amazon was pronounced by its own fauna. Despite the fact that legislation has long required every farmer to preserve at least 80% of the forest on their lands, locals are still happy to let palm trees under axes and fire. After all, only empty land can feed them. Herds will not pass through mangrove and palm forests full of insect predators and other dangers. Yes, cattle have become a quantitatively dominant species in India today. A huge number of factors influenced this, and one of them was colonization. Initially, the coastal and southern regions of Brazil were chosen for pastures, but the migration of the population under the influence of the policy of virgin land development provoked the movement of areas deep into the Amazon. Today, Brazil earns more than $5.5 billion a year from the sale of beef. If we convert this into more specific figures, then the flow of cattle going to slaughter comes from 2,800 municipalities, after which they go to 152 export slaughterhouses. Meat should be exported to 152 importing countries. The largest contributors are Rondônia, Mato Grosso, São Paulo and Mato Grosso do Sul, which together account for almost 60% of beef exports. The product is in demand in Africa and Asia. China, for example, takes 30% of all meat, and Egypt takes second and third place, 12.4%, and Russia 10.4%. The volume of purchases in other countries is small due to international and national legislation. De jure, several companies of exporters and importers have committed themselves to zero or legally maintain deforestation, and hundreds of slaughterhouses have supported these commitments. The legislative norms, of course, are very strict and fair, literally stimulated the creation of an extensive corruption scheme. For example, farmer Joher is obliged to preserve 80% of the forest on his land, cannot legally sell his cattle due to the embargo imposed by the government. Then Joher sells it to an intermediary at a discount, and he already sends it to some large slaughterhouse, for example Friggin. They turn a blind eye to the origin of meat. A ton less or a ton more will not play a role, and then the meat goes to a country where they will also close their eyes to the legality of its origin, where the law is primarily on the side of the one who offers more money. Can you imagine how much land cattle breeders need if a large slaughterhouse sends an average of one cow to the next world every 10 to 15 seconds and exports more than 10,000 tons of meat a year? Add forests burned under soybean fields. Amazon exports 15 million tons of soybeans annually, and you will understand that no fine will stop anyone who was involved in this business. This went on for quite a long time. Has anything changed now? The prospects for Gavia look disappointing. The 21st century has begun with a large-scale fight against illegal logging. The government was pressured by the world community concerned about the death of the rainforest. The settlers were evicted, fined very harshly, and it helped. From 2004 to 2012, the scale of deforestation decreased by 83.5%. The problem was in the social sector. Society did not see how nature was being reborn, but it observed the fall of rulers. In 2014, a corruption scandal broke out and an outsider, Bolsonaro, came to power. From the moment of his accession, he began to attack all initiatives aimed at reducing logging and strict punishment for poachers. Satellite images show that since his inauguration, deforestation has accelerated by 92%. Bolsonaro blocked the Obama operation, which was supposed to stop the Rondônia loggers, fired 21 heads of agencies and created a new body for pardoning after imposing a fine for illegal land grabs and forest burning. This had to come to an end. In 2019, when the number of forest fires in August exceeded 46,000, Bolsonaro denied everything and fired the head of the Brazilian Space Agency for disclosing the data. He reacted with accelerated development, but after the pressure of the Big Seven, he sent combat units to fight fires. Nevertheless, representatives of the local agricultural sector have taken an aggressive position regarding interference in the affairs of the region and are pushing Bolsonaro's position while he remains with huge money and clean hands. The disappearing billions of trees have shifted the natural balance. Droughts and floods occur more often. The dry season adds 6 days to its piggy bank in 10 years. And the carbon dioxide bank emits tons of toxic gas into the atmosphere. If the policy of the country's leadership aimed at destroying the Amazon does not change, then, with 25% of the lost forest, the consequences for the environment will become irreversible. Everyone from the president to the lumberjack needs to understand that in the garnish of this ancient forest, ruthless colonization is combined with environmental vandalism and climate warming, creating a crisis. If everything continues as it is now, the Amazon will disappear in a few generations, which will lead to terrible consequences for all life on Earth.